recording. And welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. My name is Jim, and I'm with Dean and Jared today, and we are going to be going over some hog mollies. We got some offensive linemen and some defensive linemen. But before we get started, Dean, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I am excited to talk about some of the edge rushers today. I think we got a really good set of mostly ACC defensive linemen and then a pretty good stretch of across the league of guys on the offensive line. So I think it'll be a good set of discussions today.
Fantastic. Jared, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm a little tired, but I'm very excited right now.
Cool. You guys are both college students. How can you be tired? I'm just saying.
I'm coming off a 5:30 to 8 class right now, so I immediately get right into it. I'm on Zoom for the last like 4.5 hours. You have no idea.
You're
fair enough.
Fair enough.
Bad. Well, let's start talking some football, and we have Wyatt Milum from West Virginia, and he had just accepted a Senior Bowl invite. So, Jared, what can you tell us about Mr. Milum?
I like Milum a lot. I think he's a weird player, mainly because like the build is the question mark here. So Milum's kind of like a representation of this like bigger class as a whole, where he's this like big tackle, but he has like really short arms for his size. I think he's measured in at like slightly below 33s, if I'm right. Yeah. So people will be like, okay, that's probably a guard at the next level. But my main issue with that is that some of his issues with like pad level do show up. And he's also like late to the snap like a lot, right? And it's when you're kind of projecting a dude on the inside, things like leverage when you're dealing with defensive tackles and like quickness with your hands and how you like kind of get off the snap are really important. And I think Milum kind of struggles with that. And for that reason, I kind of think he is a tackle, mainly because of his strengths. Like I think he's like a pretty quick and explosive athlete for his like size. Like he's not anything like exceptional, but like for a dude that is kind of big, he moves pretty well. And he's like incredibly strong. Like the grip strength is pretty solid. People rarely can really go through his chest. Like his anchor is really good. My major critiques on him is that like he's a really weird player because he's explosive and quick, but I would say like the actual speed when he like does like a pull when he's like doing like zone blocking is like pretty like average. And once again, like he's a little stiff in the hips, but he's like super strong. So he's like tries to like challenge dudes with his anchor. And the main question is like, at the next level, we're seeing dudes kind of do more speed of power and have the athletic tools to really like challenge the outside shoulder. How well is that going to translate? And for these like kind of concerns, but like the upside for his strength, I kind of have him like rated as like a late second rounder, maybe like early third. And it kind of reminds me a lot of like Braden Smith in a way in terms of like the build and athleticism. I will say also one quick nitpick: the hands are really rough. Like they go wide pretty consistently. Like I think the pass blocking technique needs some major work. And overall technique as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes from him playing in West Virginia's, like, I would say more of a run-heavy system. I think he just hasn't gotten the reps and pass protection that you're maybe looking for from some of the guys we're in a more pass-heavy league. I mean, we're shifting a little more run-heavy than maybe we were in the past. But, you know, I think Milum's definitely sitting a little behind the curve in pass protection. I agree with your point on him being a little stiff. I don't think he has the fluidity you look for in offensive tackles, but he is still a plus mover. I think he, like, generally his agility is pretty, like, strong as far as, like, side-to-side movement and even, like, getting out into space. He's a plus mover. And I think he would be even more of a plus mover if you decide to move him into guard. And I think he has the strength profile for it as well. I think he does a lot of good work run blocking. I think he shows a lot of his strengths there, where he's being able to drive guys out of clogged lanes. He drops his weight pretty quickly. He's able to anchor down. He handles heavy strength coming his way, but I think I understand where you're coming from about that speed to power question mark, because I think he's a little spacey on handling guys who are able to explode out of their stance. I think he's better suited when he's taking on like big dudes who are like maybe in the 290 range and stopping them in their tracks, and they don't really have the speed to match with his. I thought his coordination maybe could use some work. I think some of that comes from the hands, but I think overall I graded him out as a little higher than you. I think early to mid second round is where I see him at. I think he does have sort of the tweener problem, but I don't think he's so out of his depth in either section where you couldn't reasonably play him at tackle or guard, which I think makes him less of a tweener and more of just a position flex guy, which I think is nice. I think it gives him more space for teams who maybe have their tackle duo set or their guards duo set to introduce Milum to their system. I think that Senior Bowl invite was a good call for him. I think he's firmly in the day two conversation for me. I saw a little bit of Aaron Banks in him. I think he could work pretty well in that Niners zone block heavy system where they emphasize run blocking a little more and like rollouts and stuff like that. I thought Milum could do well there, and I know they're sort of looking for a solution at the offensive line, like throughout the offensive line next year. So I think Milum could end up there, and it would be a good fit for Shanahan.
Wait, so Dean, I have a quick question for you. Because you're kind of seeing him more as like a pure, like a position flexible guy. Do you see him like what are like the odds he ends up as a guard, and what are the odds he ends up as like a tackle his rookie year when you like take snaps?
I think you could probably put those like 60-40. I mean, it's going to depend on what the offensive line coach thinks about arm length and stuff like that. If they're more concerned about wing, I could see him playing more tackle. I think he's maybe more likely to shift into guard just based on the track record of 32-inch guys. But we've seen guys like Raymond play outside tackle. And
Colts and Packers, dude, they just like do not care at all. Like,
they do not care about length, and that's their bag. But I think maybe like some of the other teams around the league are definitely like length truthers. We've seen guys who definitely played a lot of tackle in college move inside to guard because just I think certain coaches really are concerned about that arm length stuff. I'm someone who definitely stresses arm length in my evals when it comes to. I'm definitely real strict about it. I like usually try to set a 33-inch cutoff. Milum's about like I think the measurements came back around 32 3/4, so it's not the end of the world, but it's a little bit of a not even a warning sign, just like something to think about depending on the type of scheme you run. I don't know. I'm interested to see where he goes. I think it could really go either way. I probably would lean guard, but I think it's possible either direction.
I can see that Trent Baalke is really rubbing off on you on the.
Oh, God. Yeah, I'm a big bulky guy. I love that dude.
Yeah, extend him.
Okay, so Ashton Grable from Florida A&M. So, Dean, you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, I mean, I was a little surprised to see him on the list because it's rare to see an FCS redshirt junior making waves. I watched a little bit of him in the Miami tape. I watched him go against a guy we'll talk about later, and definitely read to me as a guard. Kind of stubby for a tackle and doesn't really have the requisite grip strength. And I think what I look for when it comes to these FCS O linemen is whether they're like absolute maulers at the bottom level, because you have to take projection into account. And the guy's like 6'4", 315, like we've got on the screen. So he's no slouch in terms of guard size, but in terms of tackle, I just don't think he really has the measurements or even really the grip strength. And I was a little concerned that he wasn't, I don't know. He had pretty inconsistent reps in the Miami game. I threw on a few reps of his FCS tape against some other guys in his conference, and it just made me question translation from FCS to the league. He's a pretty decent mover, though. I think there's definitely space for him at the FBS level. If maybe this year he decides that he's done being the all conference FCS player that he is currently, and wants to move up and tries his hand at the FBS level, I think that would be good for his stock going forward. Currently, it's hard for me to view him without seeing like maybe if he gets an all-star game invite further down in the process, I would I would be more interested in him. I think it's just hard for me to project these FCS guys who, they're just not facing the type of competition. It's not like he was playing horrendously in the Miami game. He just wasn't like consistently holding his own. I don't think he was opening lanes for the Florida A&M running back at the guard position. So I don't know, probably a PFA type of guy for me currently. I'd like to see him move up and maybe take him to Florida State. See if he can bring that team above 2 wins next season, or even maybe Florida. I think Florida's losing Crenshaw Dixon next year, and he could maybe sort of play that same role for Florida.
Jared, how about you?
I mean, I'm in like a very similar boat. I think he's like kind of fitting. Like, I do think he's draftable though, mainly because we're kind of seeing this trend where like hyper athletic guards are like going in like round 6 or 7, even like no matter the level of competition, and how high you go in that like late day 2, early day 3 bubbles, like kind of dependent on like your level of competition. Like Tanner Bortolini went in like the 4th last year, but like guys like CJ Hansen and Holy Cross went in the 7th. Like then like above him, like Jared Patterson played at USC, went in the 6th, right? And they were all like fairly like similar physical profiles. Obviously, Bortolini's tape was better, and it's a big explanation for the jump in stock. My main thing with like Grable is that I think he is a player that I think would really benefit from jumping in the portal, mainly because I think he has the athletic tools to play at a higher level of college football, and that can kind of spell some of the translation concerns. And I think that can also just be best for his like stock going forward, mainly because we have seen like hyper-productive like FCS school prospects go to make the jump to the FBS, and then once they do that, they become productive players, and then they get drafted. And even if they don't get drafted, they'll get an NIL bag from a team that would want him in a rotation to potentially like compete for a starting spot, mainly because I think he's not a tackle, first off. I just don't think he has the length for it and also the strength for it. But I could see him being like a cool like zone blocking scheme center, just because like the athletic tools are there. His hands fire super quickly, and like though his hand like strength and grip strength aren't great, the anchor is pretty solid. So I think there's like a world where like is a starting FBS center center, and then like becomes like a developmental center prospect taken like day 3. But if you were to declare right now, I kind of agree in the same space of like maybe a team throws a 7th at him or like a priority free agent deal.
Yep. So to build on what Jared opened with, so his brother, Tylen Grable, plays for Buffalo. Mm-hmm. And when his brother was drafted, it was exactly the pedigree that Jared described. He was a traitsy tackle that just needs refinement. And he ended up starting the season as Buffalo's swing tackle 3, and he's now on IR. But he actually beat out Ryan Vandemark for Buffalo's swing tackle. So Vandemark got bumped down to tackle 4. But I definitely agree with the take that in round 6 and 7, you're going to look for traitsy offensive linemen, whether that's an athletic trait, whether that's a length trait, and hope that your offensive line coach can take a ball of clay and mold it into something productive.
And if I remember correctly, Tylen also had the sort of FCS transfer arc because he was at Jacksonville State before Jacksonville State had moved up to FBS as they are today. I mean, I think he could use his brother's path and get to that sort of same range, maybe become a swing interior lineman like and maybe not a tackle like his brother. His brother had crazy length, if I remember correctly, wasn't he? He was sitting at 33s. I don't know.
Like high 33 is basically 34. I think.
Yeah. I don't know if Aston's quite there, but I think
actually like 30, high 32s maybe.
Yeah,
definitely
doable for the interior.
Yeah, no, I think if he puts up like similar quality tape at like a higher conference, he'll get drafted in day 3.
Get him to the Big Ten. Let's see what he can do.
Maybe.
And speaking of the Big Ten, we have Brandon Baldwin from Michigan State. So, Jared, do you want to kick this one off?
Man, there's a lot to say here. Mainly just that I think Brandon Baldwin is like a dude where you like look at his frame and you assume one thing, then you actually watch the tape and you see a different thing. Mainly because you see this like 6'7", 330 like pound, like hulking huge man. And then you watch the tape and the dude is being pushed around by like edge rushers that are like 80 pounds lighter than him. Like he's a very weird watch, mainly because like he's simultaneously like a very like poor athlete and also very poor at technique. He started at tackle last year in 2023, but actually transitioned to guard for this year. And when you're 6'7", 330 playing guard, it's mainly because there's some sort of athletic issue with you, especially if we're talking about like the college level. And that is like just the case with him. He's just like, he has like high-end Division I framing, but he just does not have the tools or athleticism. And like while I'm projecting him, like he's like an older player. I think he's like a red shirt senior, so he has to declare. I just like don't really see a world where he even gets he's not going to get a combine invite. I'm fairly certain by that, and I don't think he's going to get drafted. I think he might get a camp deal, but I would be shocked if he were to make like a practice squad or roster, mainly because kind of like the conversation we had like beforehand. If I have this like tackle that is not really refined in technique, I would want that tackle to be as athletic and traitsy as possible. So when I do eventually break through to him, if I do that, then the potential is I have a good starter there. While with like a guy like Baldwin, who doesn't really have the tools for it, I'm going from like bad lineman to still bad lineman, but his hands are better, right? I just don't really see a world where he gets drafted, in my opinion.
Yeah,
how about you?
I had similar issues. I mean, I have to respect a guy who's been on the JUCO grind for his career. I think he's done really well for himself in getting to the Michigan State level. But it's difficult when you're that tall playing guard to really gain those technical refinements like that you're expected to have inside. And I think a lot of it comes down to his leverage. He's too tall. Like I think, and I don't know if he quite has the arm length or the foot speed to really translate back outside. And it's not to say that Michigan State's offensive line is set in stone just in general as like a bunch of NFL guys. I think what he brings is some plus drive ability. I don't think he's super strong, but I think when you get him moving with a full head of steam, there is some mauling ability when he can catch the inside of his chest. But other than that, it's a lot of you're looking at a guy who just kind of ends up in sort of the same boat as like the guy we talked about last week.
Connor Galvin.
Yeah, Connor Galvin type, where he maybe has the possibility to swing inside. Oh, Trey Zoom. Trey Zoom was the comparison.
There we go.
Galvin was the guy we were talking about in comparison to Zune. So like both sort of the types of bags of players I see Baldwin in, but even Baldwin I think has a little bit more technical refinement to do than Galvin had coming out, and Galvin still ended up a PFA ultimately. I don't know. I just didn't really see a lot of like teach tape if you're talking about draft prospects. I think like there's not much you can learn from him as a player that you're able to translate to the NFL level, aside from what to do with a guy who can move 3 steps and push. Like it's nice stuff, and I think he is suitable for the Big Ten level, and I think he probably gets a PFA deal just on size alone. I think it's difficult to not be a PFA when you're 6'7" and you have that kind of like mass behind you. I think there's definitely something there in terms of probably getting. I think he could reasonably get onto a practice squad based on size alone, and especially if the length numbers come back well. I couldn't find verified length on him, but if he puts up like 35, he'll ride a practice squad for a couple of years. That frame's good enough. But being moved into guard makes me worry about the length not coming back super well, and I don't think the athletic traits are gonna come back super well. I'd be happy to see him prove me wrong. I always want to see a JUCO guy win. I just didn't see a ton of like positive traits if you're not getting him in a space where he's able to move and then push, as opposed to a guy who's not really explosive out of his stance.
I will also say that an important thing to note, he was before this year, he was playing tackle for the team, and then he entered the portal, and then he just like did not get the offers that he wanted, and then he just went back to Michigan State, which I think is like an important thing to note, that like the tape has been that bad, and I think college teams know that, and I think the league would also know that as well when projecting him to the pros.
Okay. Easton Kitty from Kansas State.
Yeah, Kilty's cool. He's kind of stubby, but he seems like he could play all over the line just based on the experience that he's had. I think he's played at tackle, guard, and both sides of guard over the course of his career. I think he's more of a natural fit at guard due to his arm length. I saw some verified numbers going around of 32.5. I liked his footwork a lot.
Yeah.
I thought he moved his feet really well. He was consistently chugging those legs and churning and getting some power within that. And I think it adds a level of polish to his game that is going to appeal to teams at the level. And I think people like Kansas State offensive linemen. I think the league has a tendency to like what the offensive line coaches are doing there, as shown by the fact that KT Leviston got a late round draft pick next year. And I thought Kilty was better than KT Leviston. So I think the floor for Kilty is around the 6th round. I thought he had some pretty good leverage, some strong hands. I thought he was very good at the beginning of the play, but I think he needs to work on finishing the play. I think at times he would strike down, get some grip on, and then sort of just like, even though his legs were moving, his arms weren't still pushing the guy like I would want him to. I think maybe that comes down to a little bit of just some upper body like strength restrictions that may be able to be remedied with a NFL strength and conditioning program. I also thought he could be a little better about setting the edge for outside runs for Kansas State. I mean, DJ Giddens is a very talented running back, and he's done a very good job blocking for him. But I think Giddens has not quite had the benefits of a guy who's pretty consistently setting the edge on that side, and I think it's probably capped a little bit of Giddens stock there. I think you could put Kilty pretty much anywhere on the line. I think at worst he ends up sort of a swing guy like Leviston did. I mean, Kilty's a little smaller. I would say he more fits the physical profile of Cooper Beebe, just a little taller. But I think there's some traits to build off of here, especially with the footwork and the lower half and the leverage. But I want to see him get a little stronger. I want to see him to get a little better balanced as he grows in the NFL. But I think we're probably looking at a solid day 3 pick here. I thought he was decent.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the similar range here. I do think that I've heard like conflicting reports on his length. I've seen some numbers that are in like the low 3.3s, but also like some numbers that are the high 3.2s. And I will say that I think the mobility and the footwork are like good enough where like if a team like the Packers draft him, where they're not really as big on length, they might try him as a swing tackle. In terms of his like tape, he reminds me a lot of like Colby Sorsdale coming out of like William and Mary in terms of like this like kind of like fluid dude. That's not like the thing about Kitty is that he's not like a great athlete, but he's like pretty fluid and like kind of quick, which is like a weird thing. Like this entire tackle class is incredibly odd in like how some of these guys are built. And I will say though that what really does bother me is like sometimes the effort he does play with. Like I feel like there's like times where he's not really like looking for work in like zone, or he's not really like doing his best to sustain a block, which I know that like some teams do value, that like having these like ass kicking maulers in the trenches where like even if they're like a little bad, they're at least going to try their ass off. So there's like a level of motor there that like teams could like be turned off of. But I do think that he has draftable tape, and I think the tools with his like feet and his quickness project well as like a guard, as in like a like kind of like a really zone heavy like blocking team where they might like pull a dude, right? And I will say that the hands aren't like super powerful, but they do fire quickly. So I think like as a guard prospect, I think there is something there.
I think the issue with his hands is they're just sort of on the low end. The measurements from spring came in at the low end of 9, and I think that sort of is limiting the general strength he's able to fire with. He's not able to spread that initial power as much as I think he'd probably like to.
So he's got those like Kenny Pickett hands, is what you're saying?
A little bigger than Kenny Pickett, but for an offensive line, sort of on that scale.
Yeah.
Okay, Bryce Cabeldue from Kansas.
I mean, I have like a pretty like similar like range on both Kilty and Cabeldue as like these developmental like guard types. Cabeldue is not going to be a tackle in my opinion, just because like once again kind of stumpy, but also like really like inconsistent like footwork at times. I will say though, Kilty's kind of more like the finesse player. Like Cabeldue is more of the power player. Like the anchor at times is like really solid, and he is built like top heavy in my opinion. He's like, the way I would describe it is like it's kind of like Johnny Bravo-esque in a way. Like he's just a really like large torso, so like a lot of his punches like deliver like pretty insane power at times, and like he's a pretty good driver in the run game, and like he really is like kind of like that like mauler that a lot of teams would like. And I think as like a guard prospect, I think this is like a day 3 dude in like early to mid day 3, so like 5th or 6th round, and I feel like he could develop into a dude where like if you have to start him, you're not really hating it, because I think that the technique does need work, but the power and strength there is starting caliber in my opinion. Like I do think the overall athletic tools are not like super great, so I don't think he's gonna be like ever like a high end starter, but I think there is something there where he can be like a swing interior guy that like could get like a bunch of like sneaky starts and like be like a good player for a team.
I think I'm just lower on the athletic potential than you. I really think this guy is going to just come in and like really bomb the testing, which is a shame because I really thought some of his flashes were really, really good when he's able to do some like just get some when he's able to do the explosiveness that he has. I think there is something there, but he just doesn't move very well. He's got some really plodding feet. I really didn't like his lateral movement, and he's strong and he shows some technical aspects if you're into that. And I think for the guard position, it's going to be a little bit easier on him in terms of, getting some of those athletic traits out there. He's not going to be quite as bad of an athlete as I think he looks like he is at tackle. He's not thrown off by like a chop move or anything. He does a pretty good job resetting his hands and engaging the pass rush moves at the next level, but I'm just really worried about those athletic traits. I mean, you put him next to a guy like Logan Brown, who I think is a decent mover, and I think he's just a clear step down from there. So the step down from Logan Brown is just really iffy for me. I don't know. I don't see starter upside. I think he definitely has the strength and the flashes to really do some work in preseason. If you're into that, I think he handles a roster spot just because he shows flashes of that Midwestern corn-fed strength that we love to see in offensive linemen. But I don't know. I was just really low on his athletic traits. I kind of just wrote him off pretty immediately there, just because I just don't think he moves very well. I think he could easily put up a red RAS number and sort of go the way of some of the other like Big Ten offensive linemen we've looked at like earlier in our careers. I don't know. I just didn't see a lot of athletic upside, which is what I look for in sort of these day 3 types. But I think maybe he could stick on a roster as like a swing guard. I think there's some really good flashes there in terms of like strength and technicality. But I didn't come away with a draftable grade on him, unfortunately. I think he probably is just sort of a solid college offensive lineman who talks his way into a depth thing. If he's a good character guy, seemed like a nice guy in interviews. I think he could stick around. I would want to see him do some coaching too. I thought he did some really cool resetting of the hand stuff. I think, and he clearly understands the technicals of the offensive line position, and I think that will work well for him as a guy looking to make his money, like as a depth player in the league.
Yeah, I think like you kind of brought this up. A lot of the issues are just like playing tackle when he's like just does not have tackle measurements or athleticism. I will say I'm a little higher on the mobility as a whole. There's just like this one rep against Texas where he kind of does this like weird like dancing thing to like kind of cover a stunt, and he like makes it. Like the main thing with me in Cabeldue that makes me think that he could have like once again by starter I mean like low end starter, like not like a good one, but like if he's your worst lineman on like a line, it's like you can survive with that. My main thing is that like whenever he has to like reach a landmark, he does get there. And I think there is some value in that in the sense that like he is like able to get there eventually. Obviously, he's not like a good mover in my opinion, but I think the strength profile and the fact that there's always the opportunity to like cut some of the upper body weight. Like generally we don't really see guys be built this way because it's just unideal. I think there's a chance where like a team might take a shot at him and like once again day 3 to be like a depth piece that can be like a fun player in like specific blocking schemes.
Yeah, I don't hate the vision there. I think there's probably a spot for him if you're looking for a guy with some raw strength profile, but I don't know. I'm probably not the one to be about these like high strength guys. I like when I'm looking at day 3, I'm looking at athletic upside personally, and I just didn't. It's just my philosophy. I think it makes sense if you're evaluating him on like flashes and strength that you could take a shot on him late in the draft. I think it's just a difference of philosophy there.
No, I totally agree with you. I will say though, if Greg Roman somehow still has like an offensive coordinator job with the Chargers, he will pitch the goddamn table for this kid. I guarantee you Greg Roman will be like, I can make this dude a star. Or like
that's a Roman O-lineman for sure.
A Roman lineman. I think this Loki is also like a McVay lineman with how much counter they run. I think there's also like some Steeler interest there. I think one of those three teams will throw him a priority free agent deal, like guaranteed, if he's not drafted. And they might burn a 7th on him. And I think that's fully worth it, in my opinion.
Just depends on where you see the depth.
Yeah, and this offensive tackle class isn't necessarily shaping up to be as strong as it was last year.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that the tackles that we're getting to next week are going to be more mainstream names. So while you guys may have had to watch some rough tape, when Jared and Dean start saying good things about tackles, you know that they're not sugarcoating it because they're giving you their truthful assessments as we go through here. And guys, I definitely appreciate how candid you're being. Okay, so we are now going to flip over to the edges. And before we talk about our edges, I want to remind people watching this podcast, we have daily content on this channel. So every single day, there is a draft podcast. So please subscribe on YouTube. Please like the podcast on YouTube. Follow Jared on Twitter. Follow Dean on Twitter. Their Twitter handles aren't there. If you find me at NFL Draft Fanatic, no, I am Fanatic. I can tell you where Dean and Jared are. I would be happy to point you to them. So with that being said, Dean, you want to kick it off about Mr. Xavier Carlton from Cal?
Yeah, Xavier Carlton's been a guy I've had on for a while just because that 6'6", 270-pound profile is exactly the type of edge rusher that, you know, is prone to make waves. And he's been a guy who I've been looking at to sort of take that jump in production. He posted, I think, back-to-back 4.5 sack seasons in the ACC last year. And this year he's come up with it. He's well built. He's extremely long. He's a little more stout than he is strong, if that makes sense. Like he's more of a stable, balanced guy than he is picking on offensive linemen and pushing them to the ground. Almost feels more like, I would say, a 5-tech than a true rush end, even though he's been playing an outside linebacker for Cal for the last 3 years. And I think this year he's done a better job than he usually does at picking on bad offensive linemen, especially against Wake Forest. I think he had a favorable matchup there and took advantage of it. As far as athleticism go, he's more of a long strider because he's 6'6" and he's got these long legs. He's a little spindly even. I would love to see some more lower body mass, but I think he's still not great get off. And I think that if you build some lower body mass, it'll be better there. Really good strength in the mitts, but I think he is a little one-dimensional in terms of power rush. But I think that power rush shows enough of a raw strength profile for me personally to take a day 3 flyer on him, especially because he's taken up a couple notches on production. I think he's started showing what potential we've seen from him in the past few years in terms of build. You've seen a guy who has these 35-inch arms, and that's a guy who sort of like an Esezi. I don't know if people remember Esezi Otomewo, who was a Minnesota guy a few years ago, who had sort of a similar build, similar long arms, and we sort of had an eye on him for a couple of years in draft hobbyist circles as a guy who could take a step. And then finally one year he started putting together production and it got him into the 6th round. And I think Carlton is going to be sort of a mid day 3 guy this year in sort of the same mold because he's got the frame that people look for, sort of I remember, I don't think he's quite as athletic as Miles Cole, but he's the guy who comes to mind because I'm a Jaguars fan and I've had to watch Miles Cole take some rotational reps over the last few weeks as Doug Peterson drives our team into the ground. But I think Carlton sort of, to me, was always a draftable frame. It was going to be a matter of production for him to take him up. So I think this 9-sack year and maybe, he's still got a couple weeks left. If he can push to double digits, I'd just love to hear it from him because I've been sort of rooting for him for the past couple years. But I think he's a developmental prospect at the NFL level. I think he's got the frame that you want from a defensive lineman, and I think you could reasonably move him around the line. I think he probably should be playing with his hand in the dirt a little more than he is currently as an outside linebacker for Cal, but Cal runs a different scheme, and you want to get him on the field as much as possible. So I think for me, he's probably in the 4th to 5th range as a developmental guy. I think he's really interesting. I think it's getting a little more common to see these 35-inch guys at the defensive line position, but it still makes it reasonable for these guys to get drafted because the length is overwhelming. And I think that's what you see when you see him go up against like Wake Forest, and he even had a pretty good game against Miami. He took care of Jalen Rivers a little bit, which, I like Jalen Rivers a decent bit. So I liked to see Carlton stand up to a guy who wasn't just the Wake Forest right tackle who I thought was kind of bad at moving. But, I think Carlton has the traits to be sort of a 125 to 150 guy. And I think if you're a team who is looking for a potential starter, maybe you've got some old guys on the defensive line that you're looking to, help them teach your new guys. I think Carlton could fit right in as you give him more of a pass rush bag than he currently has. If you can get him a little better about converting speed to power instead of just going all in with the strong mitts, I think you've got a really interesting player on your hands.
Jared, how about you?
I mean, I'm in like a very similar boat. I think he's oozing with potential, mainly just because the frame is just kind of absurd. Like 6'6", 270 with 35-inch arms does not really come around all that often, in my opinion. Like, obviously, we've seen a couple of dudes kind of like make the league with that, but like once again, it's not really that common. I will say though, he does give me the vibe of a dude that's going to test a lot better than he actually plays, mainly because I feel like he might be like the most raw, like edge rushing prospect I've seen so far in this cycle, mainly because like he does this really weird thing where the get off is like, it's not there. But when he's given like a clear lane to the quarterback, he just like explodes, right? And it's an odd thing because what that kind of tells me is that he has athletic tools. He just doesn't really know how to use it. Mainly because like I think the coordination is pretty bad. And I think the overall like the level of like stiffness and inflexibility with him that like kind of prevents like him to really just like dominate some bad tackles. Like I think of like Miles Cole's tape, for example, where like this dude is like an athletic monster that is like hilariously unproductive at Texas Tech, right? And that happens when you're just not really refined. Like this is like kind of like an unserious. It's not my actual comp, but like it kind of reminds you of like Draymond Green's like spring tape when he was like playing like tight end and defensive end, where like you see this like big dude with like these long arms, but he's just kind of doing nothing. And like Carlton's like being productive like this year, and I think that is like a big thing is that he's kind of like understanding that he has such a big physical advantage, he can just utilize that more. But like right now, he kind of fits in that like weird like day 3, day 2 bubble, in my opinion, because I think he's gonna like test a lot better than the tape suggests. And then like a team like, for example, the Jaguars, but also like the Colts historically tend to like bounce on upside for these guys. And as like a 4th or 5th piece, I think there's potential for him to like become eventually like a rotational to even potential starter for a team. Like he reminds me a lot of like Dayo Odeyembo coming out of like Vanderbilt, where like a lot of the similar issues of like, hey, the tape itself is not like this like oozing great athlete, but then he tests like pretty solidly. And then also like right now he's like a good rotational piece as like this like hybrid defensive end, defensive tackle player. And I think Carlton can also do that.
I think what we're looking at for him is going to be a guy who if I think that like I like to look at RAS a lot, just like I think it's a good statistical measurement of what athleticism is going to look like. But I think he's going to benefit from those size adjustments, especially because he's got that plus weight, that plus height. And I do my one gripe with the RAS system is I wish they'd factor in arm length because I think that would even boost him up a little more.
I don't understand.
And I think that'll play well for him when he sort of sits in that 4.7 range.
Like I still don't understand why they don't do that. Like
I think it's just an old system, and they've like it's still a great system. I think it does very good work, and I really appreciate the guy for running it as much as he does. That's just, I think just if he ever wants to take the time to add in arm length, I think it would be good for the culture. You know what I'm saying?
I've spoke to the guy that does the RAS because I was going to try to integrate it into my site, but he already has an agreement to generate that for a different site. It's essentially using logarithms and statistical comparisons to category averages.
Yeah.
Right? Like what's the average for a defensive end? And then if your RAS is 10 out of 10, you're basically significantly above average or you're an outlier in every statistical category, right?
Yeah.
So it's easy to actually create your own if you're better at logarithms than me. Because like I have 3 engineering degrees. So like math comes very good to me, but took logarithms 35 years ago. So I need to like go back and remind myself how logarithms work so I can make the same scale. Because I've had people draw me the picture. They said, all you need is, every dimension you need on an axis. And then you can go make your own. And, you can add, like you said, add in arm length. So if arm length's important to you, you can make a score for yourself. And then if you want to measure something else and you have the statistical deviations to put in, I could keep going on, but this podcast would get way too long. But let's flip it to Tyler Barron, the edge from Miami. So, Dean, you want to kick this one off?
Yeah, I definitely watched some Florida A&M for Tyler Barron, and he had a pretty good game for Tyler Barron, but I think he just hasn't performed down the stretch like you'd want him to. I think he's strong enough, but he's not particularly athletic, and I don't think there's a lot of explosiveness there, and I think he's just sort of got a bit of a lackadaisical play style in terms of arm engagements. I remember him getting a lot of hype as sort of an underrated prospect this year. He kind of had an interesting journey with the transfer portal. He was at one point he was at Tennessee originally, did pretty well on the defensive line for them, but Tennessee just has such a great defensive line at all times. And I think Barron wanted to be the star elsewhere. So he went to Louisville for a second, then he ended up at Miami. And I think, unfortunately, by the time he got to Miami, he just had regressed a little from his Tennessee potential. I think he does really well when he's stacking blocks and maybe even I think occasionally he gets some good shed on them, but I don't think that the physical tools are quite overwhelming enough to where I'm okay, this is a guy who's going to be able to do that consistently at the NFL level. And I mean, just wasn't a particular standout on that Miami defensive line outside of the Florida A&M game. I think just he's just not athletic enough. In my opinion, I think he has, when I was looking at his snap alignments, he played a little bit of defensive tackle down the line, and I think that's kind of because he's not the greatest athlete at the edge rush position. And I think it sort of shows in games against ACC competition where he's being outmirrored by guys and even outstepped a little, which is a little troubling for someone who's about 260 pounds. He's not exactly the big dude that Carlton is, even though it's only a 15-pound difference. It's still a little closer to average for defensive linemen. I think that's sort of the story of his tape, is he's just kind of average at a lot of things and a bit of a limited explosive player. That I think there are a few teams who, when I was looking into research about what the NFL guys thought of his tape, I think he has been considered as a prospect for a long time. And I think that will probably, some of that residual will help push him into PFA and late round conversations. But me personally, my eval on him just didn't come away super positive, especially as he kind of just didn't perform at all against in conference competition, which, you can sort of attribute to Miami's defensive line being pretty decent all around. I really liked the guy next to him, Simeon Barrow. When I was watching the Miami tape, was this is the guy on the D line I'm really into. And then I was oh yeah, watching Barron. Don't forget about this. But I don't know. I was not super into him, unfortunately. I hope he gets some late round consideration and or PFA deal, because I think there is some clear potential from his Tennessee days. I think his tape has shown some decent explosiveness down the line, but I think he dealt with a few injuries over the course of his career. If he can get back to his explosive form from some of his SEC days, I think then we could start having a conversation with him as maybe a low-end starter or a rotational guy. But I don't know. Personally, I think there's other edge rushers I'm more willing to take a chance on.
And you have Carlton higher than Barron?
Carlton higher than Barron, personally, yeah.
Okay. So it looks like we lost Jared there. So
yeah, I mean, I can talk about some of the comparisons I would have for Barron. I think
go for it. Yeah.
I think Barron probably profiles best to I'm trying to think of some of these edge D tackle hybrids, maybe a lighter DeMarvin Leo from Texas A&M. I mean, we'll talk about a Texas A&M guy later, but Wheel had similar issues in terms of explosiveness and balance that he translated from his time playing defensive tackle. And I think Barron, while more of a clear edge player, has a few issues with that explosiveness. And I think it would benefit him to get in some training programs where he is like where he's able to develop some of that hand usage and explosiveness. I'm hearing word from Jared that his Wi-Fi just went out, so I can keep talking, or we can move on. We can.
I'll transition. I'll transition to the next player. So we will go to Kaimon Rucker from North Carolina.
Yeah, and we'll bring in. We can bring in Jared's thoughts if he gets his Wi-Fi back in order. Unfortunately, I've been dealing with some Verizon outages myself this year. Kaimon Rucker. I'm happy to hear I get to talk about this guy before Jared, because when we were comparing notes, I was much higher on him than he was. So this is my time to shine. Vibes on him were early day 3 for me. He's been on my radar for a couple of years now. I definitely noticed him when he was a redshirt sophomore, and I think Jim Nagy's always been a fan of his, and I bet he probably gets a Senior Bowl invite, although his production this year has not been quite as strong as I would like it to see. He keeps bulking throughout the year, and now he's up to 265, and I think that's made him lose a little bit of his explosiveness, but it's really helped that strength and leverage and power. And even though he's comes in at he's 6'2", he's a little small. I think he probably even shifts closer to 6'1", but he has good length. He comes in at around high 33s. And I think he's just a guy who has improved the good parts of his profile year to year, and he's even sort of made his bad parts a little closer to average, because for a while he just wasn't a great run defender because he's a 3-4 outside linebacker. That's where I think his profile comes in at. He's big for a 3-4 outside linebacker, but I think that's where we've seen him play at North Carolina, and that's where he's going to be for a couple of years. I would like to see him on either the Steelers or maybe even the Cardinals with Jonathan Gannon. If he's still running a 3-4, I'm pretty sure he's still doing that. I haven't watched a ton of Cardinals tape this year, but I really liked his hand placement. I really liked his general strength profile in the uppers, and I think that he's a guy who I've seen get top 50 preseason hype. I thought that was a little rich, but I think 3rd to 4th round range as a team. If you're a team who needs a 3-4 outside linebacker, I think he's probably the top prospect there in terms of straight profile. There was a little bit of Alex Highsmith to his game early on in his career. I think that sort of continued forward, even though he's a little bit of a lesser athlete to Highsmith. But I think if the Steelers or Cardinals are looking for defensive line depth, then I think Rucker could be your guy. I think easily. I think he's been a fun player for years now, and I'm excited to see him finally come out this year.
Cool. And I would definitely agree. So we just covered the last 2 players we covered got a lot of both preseason and early season hype, because there were definitely other podcasts that were shouting out Rucker and Barron after week 1 and week 2 this year. But then we're level setting now, right? Because we have more. We're not scouting one game. We're looking at where is he? Where are the players on the draft board, or what's their draft pedigree? So,
yeah, and I think Rucker was hurt for most of September, so I think that probably took him a little bit away from the draft conversation for a while. But he came back with a really strong game against Virginia. That whole North Carolina defensive line has been on one this year. I mean, I know we've been talking about Mac, or I'm saying we. I don't think we specifically, but the college football community has talked about Mac Brown maybe being on his last legs, but he has still known how to put together a really strong defensive line, even as he gets older into his 70s. I think he's still a very good defensive mind as well as a offensive mind, even though his offenses haven't translated this year.
Okay. So now we're going to get to, we got a couple of big fish here at the end of the podcast. So Donovan Ezeiruaku from Boston College.
Oh, yeah. Ezeiruaku, I've had an eye on this guy since summer, and he's having a crazy production year. I think more than I imagined, because I thought that size profile, he's 6'2", 247. That's a pretty small edge rusher, was going to hurt him a little, but he and Bill O'Brien have found a way to really make that work. And I think I definitely underestimated his athleticism coming into the summer. And I think this year he's shown that he is probably a pretty decent athlete. I mean, he's small, but he moves really well. I think probably is going to go into the 4.6s or maybe even low 4.5s. And he's got a nose for the football. I think in both run defense and pass rushing, he's been very strong in terms of finding the ball and taking the lane to get there has been really, really positive for him. And he's got impressive arm length, which makes for a difficult target to disengage from, when he also has the leverage that he gets from being a little smaller in terms of height. He's able to get those hands directly into the chest, push and swim and get into the pocket really quickly, collapse the pocket, get some sacks. And he's a good tackler for quarterbacks. He's not as effective against the run because of that size and a little bit of a lack of strength, but he's really well polished in terms of technicals. And I think that bag of pass rush moves that he developed with Bill O'Brien this year has really helped bring up those sack numbers into the double digits. I saw he got a Senior Bowl invite this year. I'm really excited to see him match up against some more NFL level offensive tackles. I think this will be a guy who we're talking about as a firm second rounder and even potentially a top 50 player. I think, and I don't want to speak for Jared, but we were comparing notes earlier, and Jared definitely saw him as a guy who could be a day two guy depending on testing. I think we both saw the same technical polish that he developed over the summer, and I think day two for sure is a lock for him, and I hope he continues to show out at the All-Star game. That if he got invites to both Shrine and Senior, I mean, we've seen some interesting Shrine Bowl acceptances today, but I think Donovan's probably going to go the Senior Bowl route, and I hope he balls out there. I think he's a really fun player.
Do you think he is one of the 10 best edge players in the class?
Yes, I don't have my list on me, but when I was talking to some people about Tuimoloau, who is a guy I'm lower on, I was like, they were like, okay, maybe you don't think he's a top defensive lineman, but who are the types of people you have above him? And I think I had about 6 to 7 guys above him, and Ezeiruaku was one of them. I would put him probably around edge 7 or 8 range. I think. Yep. I think he's a really good player. I think the edge class is really good this year. So edge 7 or 8 could still reasonably be a top 50 guy. It's just a really strong class.
Yes. So Dane Brugler had 10 edges in his top 50, and Ezeiruaku was one of them. So
I definitely don't think that's unreasonable. I think Brugler's cooking there. I think he's got the exact right mind for it. I think this is just one of those classes where we're going to see a lot of starters in the league because of the 2025 NFL draft.
Yep. So I think my hot take is I think that there would be between 15 and 20 edges taken on day 1 and 2. Right. So we're talking 10 in the top 50, and I'm suggesting that there's going to be 10 more in the top 100.
I think 15 is definitely a reasonable number. 20 might be pushing it for me. But I think there's a lot of guys who have generated a lot of good hype this year that even I'm not super in on. I think there's a lot of guys for a lot of different schemes, and I think that'll definitely contribute to a high number of edge rushers taken in the top 3 rounds. I think my guess would probably, if I was to set an over under, I think 16 and a half would probably be my line. I think it's going to be in the 15 to 17 range, personally.
Yep, and that's why we're sifting through we're not even sifting through all of them. We are probably, on this podcast, we are probably going to be, just with Jared and Dean, we're probably going to be sorting through between 25 and 30 edges. And then at the end, we'll ask them, okay, tell us who your top 20 are. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
I just have to hope we get all the day 2 guys, because I think we're seeing risers this year, and I think we've got a really good list, but it's just such a good class this year. It always feels like you could be missing someone.
Yep. So speaking of a riser, we're saving the best for last. We have Shemar Stewart from Texas A&M. And if you're talking about Texas A&M, you got to make sure you get the right Shemar because they have a few of them. So we are talking about Shemar Stewart.
Yeah.
Take it away, Dean.
I mean, Stewart and Turner are the faces of that defensive line. And I think Stewart, and I'm really bummed Jared isn't here to talk about this because Jared
He's
has.
here. I'm about to pop him back in.
Oh, let's go. Good. Thank
Back,
God.
baby. Sorry.
Let's go. I know you should take
okay.
Stewart first, Jared.
No, hold on. We'll give him Ezeiruaku.
Oh yeah.
You can go ahead and do Ezeiruaku, and then we just started Stewart as you popped in. So
perfect.
Go ahead and tell us what you like about Donovan Ezeiruaku.
All right, my cat like a massive fiasco just happened in my apartment related to my Wi-Fi. My cat like got underneath the cables on my router, and then basically like knocked my entire system out. So
no worries.
Yeah, but it's all good now. So Ezeiruaku, Dean, where did you fall on him? Just curious.
I put him top 50. I didn't know if you were going to make it back in, so I tried to combine our draft grades a little. I put him top 50.
I'm in like a very similar boat. I think I'm a little lower, just because I have some like size concerns. But I mean, the dude is like a really developed pass rusher. Like generally when you think of like a guy with his like profile that's like undersized 240-pound edge player, you think like, oh, he just explodes off the line and then like that's it. But he's really technical. Like he has like good hands. Like he has this like really like dangerous ghost and dip move that's like super sick. And he has like really like good hand usage when like rushing, but also when run defending, which is like a thing that I was kind of surprised about because he gets off blocks like really quickly. The main issue is that like at the end of the day, like 240 is 240. So like he's going to take losses when run defending, which is what is going to be expected. But the main reason that I'm a lot higher on him than like other like prospects of this archetype is that he's like really long arm length wise. He's like 34 inches. And that makes me think that like he could get up to the 250, 260 range. And because he wins mainly off of technique, I don't think that would actually hinder his like pass rush ability whatsoever. This isn't like not like a Bryce Huff scenario where he like is stubby and also not technical. So like if you add any weight, he could just like become bad. Like since he is like kind of this finesse technical rusher with these long veiny, like these long arms, I think there is a world where like he's an every down good starter while also being like at least an average run defender while being extremely technical and like could be a starting edge player for a team.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree on the run defense concerns, but I also think that those technicals could I think he's got a base to build off of. I think you're totally right.
Yeah. Like I think this is a really, really fun like first year designated pass rusher into potential full year starter for a team with like an aging veteran. Like
I think Jared. Oh, okay. So one of the things that Dean and I were talking about, how many edges do you think go in the top 100?
Oh, 100 is interesting. I think this edge class is really good. And we're seeing a point in the league where teams are really willing to take like their third edge piece really high. Where I think we could see like 10 to 15 in the top 100 pretty easily.
Well, we have 10 in the top 50, right? So
yeah.
How many more do you think stack into the top 100?
I'm thinking like probably like honestly, the thing is there's going to be guys that are in the top 100 that won't go top 100 just because of like draft needs and like.
Yeah, but I'm saying drafted in the first 3 rounds.
I would say probably around like high teens. I would say like 18s by betting number.
Okay.
How about you, Dean?
I said 17 was my 16, 17.
Yeah, 16 and a half.
Same boat.
I was like, I think it could easily be somewhere in the 15 to 17 range.
Because I think 20 is getting to a point where getting good players at like other positions to fall way too much, in my opinion.
Yeah, that was my thought process as well.
So one other thing to build on what Jared was saying. So there's a world where if you can rush the passer, you get a 10-year career in the NFL as an edge. Even if you can't play more than 30% of the snaps, there is a world with a designated pass rusher. And you can see players like Leonard Floyd in that. Von Miller is doing that right now. Like Buffalo's not using Von Miller on first and second down. He can still play. I think in Kansas City, the game that was just last weekend, he played more on first and second down. But there's a world where if you can rush the passer, even if you have the lighter frame, it is so hard to find pass rushers. If you have any level of pass rush juice, you can have an easy 10-year career in the NFL as a pass rusher. So.
I think what also helps Donovan too is that like it's not like he's just like exploding out of a cannon like pass rusher. He is very athletic. He's a good athlete, but he's winning with like finesse and like pass rush moves, which are just like two things that translate very well with like aging pass rushers. Like we have seen the dudes that play for a long time and are productive for a while. Like I think a lot of like obviously wildly different size profiles, but Zadarius Smith is a very similar like concept of like this dude has really active hands and good swim moves, and he's putting up like very good seasons at like 32. Like I think Donovan could be like a productive pass rusher into his 30s just because he's so technical.
Cool. Okay, and we will give Jared, you can get the big finish. You can start us off with Shemar Stewart from Texas A&M.
Man, all I'm saying is if Travon Walker wasn't already on the Jaguars. Trent Baalke would. He would. Shemar Stewart is like depending on where he goes is entirely based off like a team's philosophy on edge players, because a lot of teams are going to this mindset of like you're not really drafting edges to like what they're doing year one, but what they're going to do like 2 years from now. And with Shemar Stewart, he has the highest upside in the entire class, in my opinion. Like I think like he's in the boat of like the Rashawn Garys, the Travon Walkers, the Jadeveon Clowney's of the world in terms of like athletic tools. Like he's right now like listed at 6'6", 290. I don't think he's playing at it right now, but like I think at like 270 he could run like 4.5 high, like maybe low 4.6, and that's like a ridiculous like thing to have coming out of that frame, because he's also like 6'6" with incredibly long arms. And I think it's just like this really raw, but like kind of explosive pass rusher that makes me kind of really interested in him, because though he is very raw, he is like an extremely good run defender, not just from like a whole physicality, like, oh, can set the hell out of this edge, but he's got like very good discipline and like knows how to shed blocks. And I think that kind of like makes his projection as like this kind of like raw toolsy player a little better, because there is some value you can get out of him year one with like the early down stuff. Right. And he just like kind of reminds me a lot of like Rashawn Gary's process, mainly because Rashawn Gary was kind of like in this like weird tweener mold at Michigan, where he was like this like 6'4", 6'5", like defensive lineman that was like 290. But by the time of the combine, he was like 270. And like any of the tweener talks were kind of gone. He was just like a big edge player. And I think Shemar is going to do something very similar and going to test also very similar, which means he's going to test amazingly. And I just feel like this is a dude that, based on how we've seen these prospects go in the past, is a lock for the top 15, and I would personally take in the top 10.
Yeah, I saw Shemar Stewart, and I was just like, yeah, well, if Baalke wants another edge rusher and he still somehow has a job next year, it's going to be hard to get him to not take Stewart. I see a lot of athletic potential in Stewart. I totally agree. He's a classic Texas A&M defensive lineman that is massive but can still run. That athletic potential hasn't quite translated into on-field production yet.
I think it's like 0 sacks still, actually. I think he might have 1. Maybe.
I think he got 1. He's at 1.5. He got 1.5 in the Bowling Green game, I think. So sort of where we're looking at in terms of production looks, but obviously you're not looking at Shemar Stewart because he's particularly productive. You're looking at him because he's the most athletic dude on the field and he weighs 290 pounds. Like it's not hard to see why this guy has first round hype, why Brugler put him in his top 15, why Jared has him top 10. I'm not that rich on him personally because I've seen these Texas A&M defensive linemen who are huge that can run, that get stuck in the in-between place. But I think of the Texas A&M defensive linemen I've seen over the years, Stewart's probably the most athletic and maybe even best of them. He needs to develop a better pass rush bag to unlock his full potential, but I think that's something that's going to come with NFL development. And I would also like him to be a little bit better balanced because sometimes he just falls over. I would like to see him get a little bit better of an anchor. I think these athletic defensive tackle guys just generally have that problem because we aren't going to get to Deion Walker because he is pure defensive tackle, but Deion Walker also has a balance issue, and he is a guy who can run very well for his size. I think it's just a little bit of a coordination issue for guys who are carrying a lot of weight behind them and moving as fast as they are. But Stewart has big boomer bust potential. I think if he can get with a defensive line coach who's able to develop him into a better pass rush moves, you're going to unlock a guy who can run 4.6s at 290, and it's just going to be the end of the world for defensive linemen or for offensive linemen all across the league. But if he stagnates, I worry about what could happen in terms of just being a guy who maybe is getting more pressures than he is getting sacks. Sort of, unfortunately, how Trayvon Walker has been a little bit this year, depending on the time. But I think the floor is really still very solid. You're looking at a guy who can still do very good work in run defense and still push the pocket as a run defender and make interior offensive linemen nervous. I have him back at the first round, but I completely understand the top 15 projections on him and I think he's a solid first rounder. It would shock me if he slips out unless he has sort of an like Adebawore style fall, which I think would be ridiculous because I think he's a better player than Adebawore was.
Also, like for AA too, the bigger thing was like he was a true tweener player because he was like 6'2" and like kind of stiff. The thing that kind of makes me more confident in Shemar Stewart, because I've been kind of low in these kind of prospects beforehand. Like I had Trayvon Walker as like a top 15 guy, like mid to maybe sneaks into the 10s, but he went first overall. I was really low on the not Miles Cole, but the one that went to the Raiders.
Clennon Farrell.
No, Tyree Wilson. I was low on him as well. But what makes me kind of confident is that like he is productive in the sense that like he is generating pressures, and all it really takes is like a little better hand usage to then turn those pressures to hurries and those hurries into sacks, right? And I also feel like right now with how a lot of teams utilize stunts, he could be like an awesome setup man where like he just takes up like a different gap and then a dude just has an open rushing lane because like this dude is such a freak athlete that he's going to be on a lot of teams like reports on like how to block him. And also I think a big thing too that kind of makes me like higher on him the most is that like with Trayvon Walker that kind of made me questionable is that like you see this big huge freak athlete, but I think the power profile on like Trayvon Walker is good, but it wasn't like game wrecking. He wasn't like bulldozing tackles like every single snap. Well, like with Stewart, we're kind of seeing that more where like the pocket push is like kind of crazy at times. And the speed of power is also nuts. And with the fact that he is like not even like he's not unproductive, he just doesn't give like sack numbers. That is like a thing that I'm fully fine with because I am like a very high like, hey, if you can pressure the quarterback, you're a good player. Because at the third point, like sacks depend on so many other factors than yourself that if you can generate pressure, that's oftentimes like good enough to be like a high end player in this league. And I think Stewart has like a very high ceiling and also like not even like a terrible floor in my opinion.
So Dean, what edges you have higher than Stewart?
Currently, I have Scourton. I have Michael Williams higher than Stewart. Let me make sure I'm getting this all right. I have Pierce is interesting. I think Pierce and Stewart are sort of in the same boat for me. I think it could really go either way. I'd probably lean Stewart over Pierce right now, just based on in terms of if we're looking at guys who don't really have the production this year. I think I would rather have Shemar Stewart's build than Pierce's build. I think Abdul Carter is the other guy I would have on them. Okay. I would have Scourton, Abdul Carter, Michael Williams, and then probably in the same bucket as James Pierce.
I will say,
Jared, how about you?
He's my edge 2 behind Scourton. I'm really high in the Texas A&M duo. I think they're both going to be very good players. The main thing that kind of makes me higher on Stewart than like most classes in the past is mainly just because I feel that like this class is full of these like freaky athletes that also are just not very refined. Like I think Abdul Carter is a good player, but I don't think like the hand usage is all that great. But the get off is great. And I think like I'm low on Pierce and I'm lower on Williams because they kind of have like the same issue, less so with Williams. But if I were a team and I'm like in Scourton's off the board and like this, like, day one, like I think all pro potential players off the board. And I'm like, okay, now I'm just stuck with a bunch of dudes that are like really, really good athletes, but like are a little raw. I'm taking Stewart in that scenario because I think the upside is just simply that good.
Yeah, I see the vision.
Cool.
Like, would you like agree like on the similar basis, like how I kind of view the other edge players in this class?
I think
a little like kind of raw.
I think there's a couple polished guys. I mean, I think Scourton is really polished, and I think Abdul Carter is also very polished. Abdul Carter's just smaller, but I would agree that in terms of like Michael Williams and James Pierce and even maybe Landon Jackson, those three guys are like the big athlete, like size, speed, power type guys. And I totally would understand having Shemar over Williams. And I think he's clearly above Landon Jackson personally, even though I do really like Landon Jackson. I think it's just a different level of athleticism and build.
Yeah.
So, but I see the vision with the class.
I think Landon is like a 4.8 dude. Well, like Shemar legit might run 4.5. It's like, it's crazy. Like, I just don't understand like where these guys come from, in my opinion. It's like, how does this like happen? I don't understand how do human beings get this big and strong and fast? And I get none of it. That's my main concern here.
Everything's bigger in Texas. Isn't that what they say?
That's what they say.
So we will get to all of those edges. And like I was saying earlier in the podcast, so we're covering from the offensive line side, we're going to be covering close to 30 offensive linemen. We're also covering 30 edges, and we're not even going to be able to cover all of them. There's about 40 edges to sort through, and we're going to try to cover as many of them as we can. And then at the end, Jared and Dean are going to get a big finish because they get to talk about the guys that they like, and their boards won't be the same, and that's what's going to make this fun. So on behalf of the Mrs. R Relevant podcast and Jared and Dean, thank you very much for watching. I hope everybody has a great evening, and we'll see you again next Wednesday.
Have a happy holiday, everyone.